Hello and welcome to Farm Connections. I'm your host, Dan Hoffman. On today's episode, we visit with Machinery Pete's very own Greg Peterson. Kent TC informs us that flexible cash rental leases offer an alternative, and we talk with University of Minnesota educator David Bao about rent and land values, all here today on Farm Connections.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections, sponsored by Alcorn Clean Fuel, a farmer-owned cooperative in Claremont, Minnesota, produces ethanol, high-protein livestock feed, and corn oil, and beverage-grade carbon dioxide for resale to benefit its members and their communities. Absolute Energy, a locally owned facility, produces 115 million gallons of ethanol annually, proudly supporting local economies in Iowa and Minnesota. Absolute Energy, adding value to the neighborhood. Southern Minnesota Center for Agriculture, promoting education and careers in agriculture, connecting students with college, curriculum, and industry resources to develop, fill, and sustain jobs with agriculture in our region.
Farm Connections traveled to Austin, Minnesota to SEMA Implement to meet with a very renowned person in the machinery world. With us today is Machinery Pete. Welcome to Farm Connections.
Hey, nice to meet you, Dan.
Well, you must do a lot of fun things because I see you all over the world.
Well, it's been a fun ride, almost 29 years building the business, and yeah, we have a ton of fun. The business part, the numbers, the auction prices we've been compiling, ton of fun there, but also just the people we get to meet. Feel very honored and privileged.
Well, 29 years, you must have seen a few things change.
Oh my gosh, if we talk machinery, I mean, everything's bigger and of course costs more. But lately the computerization of all the equipment, unbelievable. Honestly, I don't think farmers get enough credit for leaning into these changes. But yeah, it's been unbelievable. And hopefully our data over the years help people figure out what all this stuff is worth.
Well, moments before we came in the shop, we leaned across the counter and we talked to a guy that self-proclaimed himself as a personality, and certainly was. But he talked about changes in not only the John Deere line, but in Case IH and McCormick. Right. Any reflections on that? He talked about Tenneco and some other companies.
Well, I grew up around the farm equipment business. My dad was a John Deere dealer in Benson, Minnesota, out in the west central part of the state. So yeah, I mean, I remember growing up 4430s, 4440s were the big monster tractors. And of course now you got the RX series, these big monsters with tracks. So yeah, everything's just got bigger. And but also it's interesting to watch the manufacturers, how they've invested in the technology. So you look at a new planter now, a high-speed planter, how precise it can be for a farmer. You know, it's all about being more efficient. And at the dealer level, of course, they're doing the same thing, investing in their employees and the technology. So the whole business has changed, but still at the heart, farming is still a personal business. And I love that part of it. And working with people, trying to help them out and telling stories.
Well, as you travel around, a lot of times you track auctions. What's happening there?
Well, again, that's at the heart of what I've been doing since 1989, compiling auction prices. And it's really interesting here in 2018, of course, it's a very challenging time with the ag economy. Uncertainty with the tariff issues, and then of course commodity prices have not been going the right direction. So there's a tendency to think, oh my gosh, things must be the 80s again. But what I've done for 29 years just compiling hard data is just tell the story on what's happening with used values. And 2018 has been a continuation going back the last couple of years. Actually, used values are holding in very strong if the item is in good condition. So when times are tough like this, I think a lot of emphasis gets put on, into the used market, and what people want and need is the best condition used stuff. So actually, again, used values have been holding very strong.
Well, if you take a look at any piece of farm machinery now, the technology, the parts, and the cost to replace or repair, there's a reason why those good, clean, low-houred machines are valuable.
Yeah, it's interesting. The new stuff keeps going up in cost every year, which we understand why that has to be, but people are really valuing warranty. So if you can find a 1 or 2 year old tractor, combine, or sprayer out on an auction, there's a ton of interest in it. And then there's also a little sub-trend where people valuing maybe the earlier machines before all the computerization, so tractors from the 80s and 90s, when you do see those show up that are really nice condition, it's almost like a feeding frenzy to acquire those, whatever color they are. So it's interesting to track and write about that.
Well, especially in tough, lean economic times, that warranty is risk management.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, just a month ago in Michigan, we saw the highest price combine we've ever seen sold at auction. It was in Wayland, Michigan, and it was a 2017 John Deere S680 four-wheel drive. Now, it was an unusual deal, only had 4 separator hours on it, so it's like new. But hard cash with no heads, it brought $360,000. So I wrote a story about it. We put it on our TV show, and a lot of people say, well, how can that be when times are so tough? $360K. But again, it's a like new machine. It's got the warranty. It was spec'd out just right. New one cost a little more, and there was no shortage of people after it. And then the beautiful thing about an auction is we can all guess on what something is worth beforehand. But I like to say chatter don't matter, because we all find out together when that hammer falls, 360K, that's what it's worth on that day in that spot.
Auctions are exciting and social in themselves. What have you seen at auctions as you traveled around?
Oh, it's a fascinating human experiment. If you look at the auction method of selling, it's an ancient method, it goes back centuries. And there's a reason it's still a viable tool today, because it entices emotional reactions. So it's fascinating to watch people's bidding strategies. One thing, I'm very careful, I don't like to tell farmers, I tell them what to do.
Good idea.
But one strategy I've noticed that works, guys up in North Dakota do it the best. I call it the jump bid. So basically you go to an auction, and so Dan, you're going to the auction and you see this tractor and you think it's worth 70K. Okay, so you know how an auction goes. They'll start the bidding out and they'll go, give me 70K. Well, no, it winds up starting at 25 or 30. And then it builds momentum. But if you know it's worth 70 and you're confident enough in yourself, if you jump in hard and say, I'll give you 55, I'll give you 60. What it does, it sucks the oxygen out of the whole process and tells all the other people they're bidding, like, that tractor's going home with this guy. And you wind up getting it for less. But you have to be ready for your buddies to say, geez, Dan, what were you doing bidding 60 right off the bat? But again, up in North Dakota, I've seen guys do that, and it saves money.
Well, the auction is usually regarded as an orderly way to transfer from seller to buyer, and also to establish the market price. Sometimes you've probably seen some deals though too, haven't you?
Well, there's a deal at every auction. In fact, back from 2007 through 13, when used values were at their all-time highest, some people said, well, everything's going high. But like I said, there's always a deal on every auction. Sometimes what savvy auctioneers will do early in a sale is they'll kind of quick sell an item. Maybe they'll do it on a lower dollar, maybe a $2,000 item. The bidding's at $1,400, boom, sold. And they do that for a purpose, because what they're telling everyone at the sale is, pay attention, we're gonna sell this stuff's going home with a new buyer. And if you just gotta pay attention. But there are buys.
Hopefully that's not a consignment sale and there's a very disappointed seller.
Well, there's two sides at the auction. There's the buyer and the seller, right? So again, it's interesting, a lot of times I report on record prices. And so people ask me sometimes, Machinery Pete, what do people think that you write about there? They just paid, $150K for this plant at record price. And it's interesting, I think there's an understanding of what's at play here. We're all finding out together what this stuff is worth, and I try to provide perspective. So we've got like a $600,000-700,000 auction prices on all types of equipment, and hopefully again, if we can say the average price is $68,500 and the highest was $82,000, it just arms you with information going in to let you know you're getting a good deal, or know when to stop.
Well, we said we'd come back to the business side, and you helped us do that. Where does your data go and how do people use it?
Well, just our website, Dan, machinerypete.com is kind of the hub for all of our content. So the videos we put out, our TV show, the blogs I write, plus all the auction price data. But there's also dealer listings there. We got about 110,000 dealer pieces for sale all around the country. We've got a searchable list of pieces on upcoming auctions that we update every day. And again, a lot of blogs and chatter, YouTube videos. So you can find it all at machinerypete.com.
Well, thank you for that. And farmers really rely on their machinery. If it wasn't for the machinery, they couldn't feed the world, really.
Yeah, machine, it's kind of a twofold thing. Like you say, these are assets that help you get the job done. And it's important as a farmer to know what your stuff is worth. So everything's sitting in your shed to kind of be continually aware of its hard cash value. Particularly in these tough times as your relationship with your lender becomes more important to be proactive. So knowing what your machinery is worth. And then again, there's also the fun part of it of, what's my 40/20 worth that has been on the farm for 45 years.
And certainly as they're preparing their balance sheet for the next growing season, your data becomes valuable, I would think.
Well, yeah, I guess I've always taken heart, Dan, all these years covering auctions. Every sale you go to, you always see people writing down prices. And what they're doing is trying to document, oh, what's that sprayer worth? What's that hay baler worth? And we've just taken that idea to the nth level. So we've got data on everything. And like you say, if you want to know what your stuff is worth, it's good to know what people just paid for it.
Good to have good data.
Well, the phrase I like that we're living in a new era and data is the new oil. I think that quote's attributed to the former CEO of Intel. But I think, it can help you make a good decision. The key is to have data that you trust and can rely on. It can be easy to get confused by data, but if it's a good data, it helps you make a good decision and feel, more secure about what you're doing.
Machinery Pete, thanks for what you do.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks for joining us in Austin, Minnesota. Stay tuned for more on Farm Connections.
Hi, this is Kent Tesey. Once harvest is completed in any given year, the tenuous task of renegotiating land rental contracts between farm operators and landlords usually begins. About 60 to 70% of the cropland in the upper Midwest is under some type of land rental agreement, and most of these are year-to-year cash rental agreements. Over time, many of these rental agreements have been between farm operators and landlords, many times retired farmers, that know each other quite well and are from the same area. As time has went on and different generations have taken over, these landlords many times are now relatives that live outside the area or land management companies that don't have that ongoing working relationship with the farm operator. Many times this can lead to more difficult negotiations and more difficult communications and understanding the farming operation. Corn and soybean prices have remained fairly low in recent years. Many of the higher land rental rates that are still in existence were set up back in an era when we had corn prices near $4 a bushel and soybean prices over $10 a bushel. Current prices are 20 to 30% below those levels, and they have resulted in some financial losses for some farmers. Landlords, in some cases, have been reluctant to lower rental rates because of strong demand for land, some excellent crop yields in some areas, and also some higher escalating real estate taxes in some cases. The weaker crop economics in recent years has somewhat tempered the strong demand for land rent and is also causing some landlords to look at alternatives. One alternative to consider for landlords and farm operators would be a flexible cash lease that sets up a base rent that's close to a break-even level and then allows the final rental rate to flex upward if yields and/or prices exceed the established baseline levels. Sometimes this is done on a crop revenue basis. This type of arrangement, if agreed upon, can be certainly beneficial to the farm operator because they now have a base rental rate that's at break even, but it can also be very beneficial to the landlord that allows that landlord to capitalize if there are better than expected yields and prices. It's also a way for a landlord to work with long-term farm operators or newer farm operators that can't afford the higher cash rental rates. There are many variations in flexible cash leases, such as price only, yield only, or a final revenue compared to a base revenue. Whatever the flexible agreement, it's important that both the farm operator and landlord are in agreement and understand the calculations. Good written lease is very important with flexible leases, as is with any rental contract. And of course, good communications is very essential to a good working relationship in any land rental arrangement. This is Kent Tesey, and that's all for today.
On site in Clarks Grove, Minnesota, Farm Connections with David Bow from the University of Minnesota, Extension Educator for U of M and all other good things.
You bet.
Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you.
David, you have a lot of research and presentations on economics and other things. Tell us about your work.
Well, I have a broad base of work. I work with farmers and marketing groups. I have 4 of those go on monthly, so I get a lot of the economics there. I do rental talks, which I come around in the fall, November, December, do the whole state of Minnesota. We did 45 talks on what's a fair farm rental rate. We do farm transfer and estate planning workshops, an all-day workshop that helps people figure out how to transfer their assets to the next generation. Help with labor workshops. I do a farm resource guide. It's a 130-page booklet every year, so I keep out of trouble.
I was going to say, what do you do in your spare time?
I enjoy life.
Mostly working.
Yeah.
So today you talked a lot about that delicate balance between operator and landlord in terms of fair market rents. Any thoughts on that?
It's been really challenging the last few years. What's a fair rental rate? And that's the topic of my workshops, because what's happened is we had really good times, and when the really good times, rents were slow to go up, and now we're in a poor time, and rents are slower to go down in the poor time. So there's when they're going up, the farmer's really prospering, the landlord was benefiting all along. And now when it's going down, the landlords are resistant to give up their newfound income, and the farmers are trying to make it work. And the numbers projections for the last 4 years in corn have been losses in southern Minnesota on a cash basis, and on beans they've lost 2 out of the last 4 years. Next year, for this year's 18 crop, looks like losses again. 19 crops again project to be losses on both corn and beans. The tariff this year, though, will probably make the money that's coming from the tariff bailout is probably going to make beans profitable this year again. So the rents are averaging, I still have $300 plus rents to $100 rents. In the area, I'd say $200, $220 is probably the average rent for southern Minnesota. And the way the cash flows work out, they should probably pay about $100 an acre rent to make it budget-wise for the farmer's side. But that would be a big cut of half their income to the landlord's side. So that's where they're slow to go down and they're slow to go up. So the landlords are thinking, well, you didn't really pay me all you could have in the really good times, so now I'm just averaging it out on the downside. But the economics have been bad for 5 years now, that they're going to have to do something.
And imagine if you try and replace that land in the current market value, put whatever benchmark you want on it, thousands of dollars per acre, times the interest, that doesn't work either. So any advice?
Because land values are also holding their own. I do land value information as well, and recent sales of $9,000, still another one of $3,700, which would probably work better than the $9,000 for cash flows. But even the interest rates are going up, so the cost to borrow is getting more expensive.
Well, take 9,000 times 5%, $450
Just in interest.
Interest
if
alone.
you borrowed it all. But
so opportunity costs and a few other things factored in there. How about when the landlord says, did you see what happened to my property tax statement? Take a look, and it's fairly large on a per acre basis. The highest I've heard for I would say urban, was about $78 an acre.
Oh, I've heard of $100 an acre in this county.
Okay.
From a farmer last year at this workshop, he came up to me and said, my tax is over $100 an acre.
And
I've been in Metro County a couple years ago, it was 119. Was the highest I've heard per acre for a farmer.
So we've got a cost squeeze on both parts.
Sides, yep.
Is there ever a strategy of flex rent or some other way to maybe help both sides a little bit?
The flexible rental rates are really good. I'm pitching them for a lot of years. It's been growing. We used to be under 10%. I would say now if we're at the fifth, that's probably about 20% that's been growing. And I like flexible rental agreements because it shares the risk between the farmer and the landlord. So what I kind of use for a general term is a third of the corn crop and maybe 40% of the soybean crop is what the landlord gets. So we take a third of 180 bushels of corn, that's 60 bushels. Take the current price of $3, that's $180 rent. Take 40% of 50 bushel beans, that's 20 bushels, times $9, it's $180 rent. And that would adjust up and down as the prices go up and down. And that when the prices are good, the farmers can pay more rent, so the landlord should get more rent. When the prices are lower, Well, then maybe they have crop insurance to cover some of that lower part. So they put a base rent in there, so landlord's going to guarantee a base price. And then if it goes lower than that, that's where crop insurance should kick in for the farmer.
David, you bring up some great points. And of course, one of the things that the operator or the farmer has to worry about is the competing person that comes in and says, well, I can do better than that, I'll give more. Thoughts on that?
That's a real challenge for why rents haven't gone down as dramatically as they would, because I take a room with 20 people and they're all farmers, and somebody in the room is going to pay that high rent rate when, for whatever reason, they want to get the land base, they want to expand, they want to grow. So until everybody says no, the farmers are their own worst enemies right now, because they're still out there. I know of one farmer, for example, that's still paying $3 rent, and he's renting from a lot of relatives. So again, the challenge is, how do I work with my relatives to say, well, I can't afford $3 rent anymore, when he could 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and today he can't.
Well, you also do some work on succession planning. Any thoughts on that?
Right now, there's going to be a lot of transition, I think, taking place as our average age of farmer still maintains around 56 to 58 years old in Minnesota. And we're farming longer and longer. There's still 90-year-old people out there farming, actively farming. There's a lot of 70-year-olds still farming. So the transitions are gradual. And the hard part for the transition part is going forward with what generation they're going to pass it to. If you're a 70-year-old person and you're still farming, your kids have another occupation. They've done something else probably, and they're in their 50s probably. So they're going to want to come back and farm. Some of them do. But then you've got another generation that's probably in the 30s, and then you have another generation. So who is going to be the next generation to farm? And that's a challenge for a lot of people in the farm transfer decision. And a lot of times they don't have anybody that wants to farm. They haven't had the exposure. If you go a couple generations removed and all your kids have gone somewhere else for an occupation, their kids don't have any farm experience.
It's a high skill occupation, and if you come in with either beginning set of skills or low set of skills, you have a real challenge.
Yep, but then for example, one of my coworkers, her husband never farmed, and he's a full-time farmer now because they had all daughters, and she's working the farm, and he became a full-time farmer with no experience. But he had a wife to help him learn the tools.
Sounds like there was some mentoring that happened as well.
Right. So anybody can farm. It's really hard though with economics right now for somebody else to get out who doesn't have a family background or the family help, because like you said earlier, if we have a $9,000 an acre purchase price, who can afford to get into farming at that cost?
It works really well if you put $8,000 down on $9,000 land and have a finance about $1,000, then it would work.
And there's still a lot of people who have a lot of cash. Right now, our current crisis is not the balance sheet. We have a great farm balance sheet, but the problem is cash flow. We don't have enough working capital to pay the cash flow out.
Profitability.
Yep.
David, great information, and if farmers need more help or wish to seek some guidance, I would certainly suggest University of Minnesota Extension educators or the Riverline Community College Farm Business Management or South Central or anywhere else in our state.
Yep, and we have a great website. You can go to Extension's website. We put a lot of fact sheets out there. Materials are on there so they can go look at it themselves, information as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the work you do.
You bet.
Stay tuned for more on Farm Connections.
With harvest challenges in the upper Midwest from wet weather, news of President Trump's announcing a directive to the EPA for year-round E15 was welcome news for corn farmers. Currently, a maximum blend of 10% ethanol is allowed. This directive will increase that to a 15% blend. Harold Woolley is a farmer from Medelia, Minnesota, and a member of the National Corn Board. He was pleased with the news.
It's the first step in a process towards getting year-round E15 sales approved. I think it's a very good move for consumers, gives them the choice to purchase E15, and a lot of our retailers are branding it as unleaded 88. So when consumers go to the gas station, they should look for unleaded 88. It's E15. It's generally 3 to 10 cents a gallon cheaper, and it does have 88 octane, so it's very good fuel. It's approved for use in all vehicles 2001 and newer, so at least 90% of the vehicles on the road can use it.
The E15 announcement was good news for a number of reasons, according to Woolley. Increased usage of corn is just one of them.
I think this is going to be a good move for our retailers as well, our fuel retailers, because it gives them the option of selling E15 year-round, so they can afford to invest in the infrastructure, the pumps and the tanks that they need to market this fuel. It's a good move for our ethanol industry. It's going to increase the number of gallons that they can sell. And ultimately, it's a good move for corn farmers like me. It's going to increase the use of corn. You know, we've got a substantial carryover, 2 billion bushels. We need to find ways to use up that corn.
With farm prices at very low levels, agriculture is looking for any bit of good news. The recent announcement of completion of NAFTA is one piece, E15 is another. This is Lynn Kettleson reporting.
Whether it's fair market or fair share, we're all looking to come out ahead. Doing your research and listening to the advice of others helps us to ensure our own peace of mind. I'm Dan Hoffman. Thank you for joining us today on Farm Connections.